Hello. Today let us see what is the difference between an inductive approach and a deductive approach in doing research and how both these approach will complementary to each other while doing the research. The question was 2019 June paper. Explain the features of inductive and deductive methods. Both methods are complementary to each other. Comment on it. Broadly, we can divide reasoning into inductive and deductive. In the deductive reasoning, that works from general to more specific. It is informally, we can call it as top-down approach. We might begin with thinking up a theory about our own topic of interest. We then narrow down that into more specific hypothesis that we can test. We narrow down even further when we collect observation to address the hypothesis. First we start with a theory, then we narrow down into hypothesis when we observe various circumstances, and then we have to address or prove our hypothesis. This ultimately leads to test the hypothesis with specific data. So the flowchart you can see, we start with the theory that leads to hypothesis, then observation, narrow down further into observation, and we observe many things and we confirm that. Here we are deducting conclusions from premises or proposition. So let us see what are the different steps in deductive approach. Deducing hypothesis from a theory. There is a theory that is existing, and from the existing theory we are deducing a hypothesis. Then we are formulating the hypothesis in operational terms. In which way we can test it? In the operational term we are proposing the relationship between the specific variable. Then third step, testing hypothesis by applying relevant methods such as regression and correlation analysis, mean, median, mode, etc. Examining the outcome of the test, thus confirming or rejecting the theory. When analyzing the outcome of the test, it is important to compare the research findings with the literature review findings. Already whatever is available in the literature, we should compare our findings with that. Modification of the theory in instances when hypothesis is not confirmed. Whenever we found out that our hypothesis is not correct or not confirmed, we have to change our theory and we have to proceed in another direction. Next is inductive reasoning. Inductive approach start with a particular set of observation and move to a more general set of proposition. Researchers move from data to theory or from specific to general, from smaller to bigger, that is from particular to general the researcher is moving. Researcher using inductive reasoning begins by collecting data that is relevant to their topic of interest. First, the researcher is observing and collecting the data. Once the substantial amount of data have been collected, the researcher will step back and look at the data patterns. After collecting the data, he is looking at the data in order to find out if there is any pattern. Then, so in the flowchart we can see that first gather the data, then look for the pattern, then developing the theories. Now let us see an example how to meet the needs of high school students with learning disabilities. This is a research question. Then so researcher has to find out, or he has to observe different students with disabilities, and he has to collect data from them. So first of all, the researcher is collecting the data individually from a specific subject. That is a specific student. He is collecting data. That student has learning disability. Then he moves on to another student with learning disability. Likewise, he has to collect data from different students. Here, the researcher is collecting data from 20 students. Researcher can develop different strategies and method for teaching and evaluation. So in order to help the students with the learning disabilities, the teachers can use different strategies and methods for teaching as well as for the evaluation purpose. He can conduct experiments with self-instructional method in them, maybe the remedial instructional method or self-instructional method, various method a teacher can make use of that. Then he can develop hypothesis. So from his study he can develop a hypothesis saying that what will be the hypothesis? Remedial instruction method help the students with learning disabilities. So he start with observation and at last he made a hypothesis or a theory. Then if we look at the same example in the deductive way, what will be the hypothesis then? Remedial instructional method help the students with learning disabilities for high achievement. So we are starting with a hypothesis that remedial instructional method will help the students with learning disability. So then later on the researcher has to move on to the observations. Then this might be the hypothesis of a researcher. He has to already done the experiment, maybe already previously or past researchers have done the experiment, and based on that one researcher got this hypothesis. Now new researcher is checking its validity. So in the deductive method, what other researchers are doing, these researchers are taking this hypothesis as a theory or as a point, and from there he is checking the validity of that hypothesis. Here the same example we explained in two ways, first the inductive way and second one in the deductive way. Now let us see what are the circumstances in which we select deductive approach or inductive approach. So that there are 3 pointers like wealth of literature, time availability and risk. Let us see one by one. Whenever the literature is available in plenty, we use the deductive approach. Likewise, when there is a scarcity of resources, there is very less literature is available on a particular topic of interest, then we use inductive approach. Then time availability. For inductive approach, we need only short time. So whenever the time is very short, we can use the deductive approach, and whenever time is more and there is no time limit, then we can use inductive approach. Then risk. To avoid, whenever we wanted to avoid risk and we don't want to take risk, we have to use the deductive approach. When a researcher is ready to take risk, then he can use the inductive approach. Sometimes inductive approach may not lead to any theories, so it is waste of time. So that is a risk. Now let us see how it is complementary to each other. What is inductive and deductive approach? While inductive and deductive approach to the research seems quite different, they are opposite approaches actually, but it is complementary to each other in research purpose, because a researcher has to use inductive approach and deductive approach based on the type of study he is going to conduct. Or maybe in single study itself he has to use both the methods at different areas. While inductive and deductive approach to research seems quite different, they can actually be rather complementary to each other. Some researchers take a mixed approach for their study because both combined form, that is deductive and inductive. In some other cases, researcher might begin a study with a plan to conduct inductive. First he may plan to conduct only an inductive study, or he decided to plan a deductive study, but later on he will realize that I have to use the other approach in order to illuminate my findings, or in order to make it very clear, in order to make my study much clearer, so that he may switch from one approach to other approach. So here we can conclude that both the inductive and deductive approach are complementary to each other.